Elderly woman is abandoned by her children after the death of her husband, and upon reading a letter, she discovers he had been cheating on her all along. Then, she does this. Before the story begins, comment below which city you're watching the video from. We love getting to know our viewers. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss more exciting stories. Enjoy the story and see you soon. Carol sat there, alone in the large living room of the mansion, holding Theodore's letter in her hands. The letter he had left before he died, but until now, no one had the courage to open it. The sound of the door opening interrupted the deafening silence. Katerina, the sister, entered hurriedly, her eyes red. Dmitri, Carol's son, was right behind her, his face a mixture of exhaustion and anguish. And in the hallway, a figure no one expected, Louise, the family's old friend, now older and more somber, but with something in his eyes that seemed to promise hidden secrets. Carol, still holding the letter, looked at them and said, unable to hide the tension in her voice, "He knew." Their gazes met, and the weight of her words lingered in the air. The longing for Theodore, which had always filled the house, now seemed to be only the beginning of something greater, something that could change everything. "Knew what?" Dmitri asked, confused, but with a glint of curiosity in his eyes that no one could deny. Katerina, in her silence, simply stared at the letter as if it were the only object capable of bringing some peace. Louise, who seemed to be the only one with control over the situation, stepped forward. "He didn't just know. He planned this. Each of you, each one of us, we all have a role in this end. And this end, it's not the end." Carol took a deep breath, swallowing the words her heart didn't want to release. She knew Theodore's letter wasn't just a farewell. That letter was a map, a message he had left to show what still needed to be done, what their lives could still become. But as she looked at their faces, especially her children's, she felt that the task would be harder than she had imagined. They were so lost, so distant from each other. How could she make them follow this path? Without warning, Louise, with an unsettling calmness, looked at the letter in Carol's hands. "It's time to open it, Carol. He's done his part." That was enough for everyone to gather closer. She, with a voice that was no longer hers, read the first words of Theodore, which reverberated in the room with unexpected force. "Dear Carol," it began, and each letter seemed heavier than the last. "If you are reading this, it means I'm no longer with you, and I know that at this moment nothing I say can ease your pain. But please, read until the end. What I write is for you, all of you. Each one of you has a mission to fulfill." Katerina's eyes narrowed, her hand trembling slightly. Dmitri, who never showed vulnerability, felt his breath falter for a second, but it was Luis who, with his silence, gave the signal that this was just the beginning. "Each of you has a mission," Carol repeated, now more to herself than to the others. The letter continued, but what Carol didn't know was that it wasn't just a farewell message, it was an invitation, and what seemed like the end of a life was turning at that very moment into the beginning of a new journey for all of them. The mansion, which had once echoed only with the sound of longing, now seemed alive again. A story they had never imagined, but that unknowingly they were all about to live. Carol held the letter with trembling hands, but a strange feeling enveloped her, as if it were the start of a journey. Around her, the silence was heavy, interrupted only by Dmitri's labored breath, who was about to ask what more was written. Katerina stared blankly, as if it were impossible to believe what she had just heard. Luis, however, remained in his disturbing calmness. "There's more, isn't there?" Carol asked, her eyes fixed on the letter. The tension in the room was at its peak. Louise, as if knowing something was about to be revealed, gave a slight nod. "He prepared everything," Louise replied, with a seriousness Carol hadn't seen in him before. Theodore was always wiser than anyone realized. The letter isn't just for you, it's for the entire family. He knew something was going to happen, that all of you would need to come together to finish what was started. Carol felt a chill. She didn't know what that meant, but she sensed that the weight of this revelation would be more than anyone could bear. Dmitri, impatient and still digesting Louise's words, looked at Carol and said with a slight tone of sarcasm, so he knew all this was going to happen, and that something like gathering the family would be necessary. Sounds like a movie plot, Mom. Where is this going to lead us? Carol felt a lump in her throat. But before she could answer, Katerina, who was more thoughtful, approached the letter and said almost to herself, "He's not asking us to understand. He's asking us to act." It was at that moment that the tension broke, but the feeling of uncertainty remained in the air. Carol, without another word, unfolded the letter and continued reading. Theodore's words mixed with her thoughts, and soon a sentence jumped out at her, as if it had been written especially for her. "Carol, you've always had the courage others didn't. Now more than ever, it's time to remember what really matters. Your mission starts with the house, and it's the key to what comes next." The house, the Andrade mansion. What did that mean? Carol didn't know, but something inside her told her that this mansion, now full of echoes from the past and silence, held secrets she hadn't imagined. She looked at Dmitri and Katerina, both with confused expressions. Louise, on the other hand, seemed to understand something the others couldn't see. "There's more," he said calmly. "And it's not just about the house." He knew the family needed to reunite. "Each one of your missions is intertwined. The real story of Theodore isn't in what he did, but in what he left for you to become." Carol took a deep breath. She knew Louise's words were heavy with meaning. But what exactly did they need to do? Life seemed to be changing in an irreversible way. She felt the weight of her responsibilities grow, and deep down, she knew that more than good intentions would be needed to reconnect the family. In the background, the door opened again. It was Rosa, returning to the mansion after a decade away. She was different, more mature, more serious, but with the same investigative look Carol remembered so well. "Mom, I heard about Theodore's letter," Rosa said, looking at the others with a slight smile. "Maybe I have something to add." Rosa's presence, though unexpected, seemed like the missing piece of the puzzle. She, an investigative journalist, probably knew more about Theodore's story than anyone present. Carol looked at her, feeling a pang of curiosity. If anyone could understand the true meaning of the letter, it would probably be Rosa. After all, she had spent years studying stories, uncovering secrets that others preferred to leave in the past. "Are you here to help, Rosa?" Carol asked, her voice trembling with the hope that perhaps the young woman could, in some way, illuminate the path that now seemed so obscure. Rosa looked at everyone and, with an enigmatic smile, replied, "I don't know yet, but I know that Theodore left clues in more than one place, and the Andrade family story. It's not over yet." The next day brought a different energy to the Andrade mansion. Something was about to happen, something that would break the quiet routine that had taken over the house since Theodore's death. Carol, more determined than ever, knew that the key to reconnecting the lost bonds was somewhere inside the house. But where, exactly? Meanwhile, Katerina, though still shaken by recent events, felt a growing impulse inside her. Since Carol's husband had passed away, she had felt adrift, unsure of who she was or what she wanted to do with her life. For years, her culinary talents had been overshadowed by sadness, the weariness of routine, and the pressure to be the stronger sister. But now, something was awakening inside her, and she couldn't ignore it. "Maybe it's time to return to pastry," thought Katerina as she arranged some pots in the mansion's kitchen. She had always known that the grandmother's bakery, a business Theodore had loved so much, was a part of the family's history. But she never imagined that the idea of reviving that dream would become so urgent. Maybe that's what he meant, she reflected, touching an old photo of Theodore next to a strawberry pie with that wide smile that seemed endless. She sat there in silence when the kitchen door opened softly. It was Luis. He who had been in the mansion for days, always on the sidelines, now approached with a serious expression. "Katerina, you've always had an incredible talent for cooking. Don't let it slip away with time. Theodore knew how much it meant to you," said Luis with his deep voice, but full of a sincerity that caught her by surprise. Katerina watched him closely, somewhat startled. How did Luis know this? How did he know how much the bakery meant to her? She knew he always had an attentive eye, but this seemed very personal. "Do you really think I can do this?" she asked, not hiding the doubt in her voice. Luis nodded. Grandmother's bakery was always more than a business. It was Theodore's heart, and now it could be yours too. Believe me, the kitchen is where you can find yourself again. This is your path. Those words resonated with Katerina in an unexpected way. She knew he was right, but the fear of failure still consumed her. What was going through Luis's mind, and why was he so determined to help her follow this path? Meanwhile, Dmitri was in the living room, lost in his own thoughts. Since Theodore's death, he had felt increasingly lost in his work. The material success, which had once seemed like the only path, now felt hollow. Luis's words, along with his mother's and even Rosa's, about rescuing something from the past, echoed in his mind. What did he really want for himself? Literature, he knew, was something that called to him, something that had always been there, but that he had never had the courage to follow. He knew he was ready to take the next step, but how? How could he risk something so uncertain when the weight of his family's legacy weighed so heavily on him? When Luis entered the room, Dmitri looked at him with a tired expression. "I know what you're going to say. We're all trying to find something in the past. But what about the future? What do we do with the present? What can I do with all this?" Luis looked at him for a moment, his dark and deep eyes, as if he knew exactly what Dmitri was facing. "You've always had the potential for more than business, Dmitri. Your true talent is not in what you can gain, but in what you can create. Your story is in the word, in what you write." Dmitri remained silent, reflecting on that. Perhaps Luis was right. Maybe he needed to write his own story and not just live in the shadow of what others expected of him. As the day passed, a sense of change filled the mansion. Carol, who hadn't paid enough attention to these small signs, was beginning to understand that everyone around her was, in some way, being called to something bigger, something that extended beyond loss and mourning. It was time to rebuild, to find purpose once again. In the late afternoon, Carol gathered her children and Luis in the mansion's grand room. "I think we all know what Theodore wanted," she said, looking at each of them. "Now, it's time to take the next step, to rescue the essence of what he always believed in. Life cannot be lived in the past, but we can find our roots there, and I think, for each of us, the path is clear." What she didn't know was that while they gathered there, Rosa, with her investigative eye, was beginning to uncover clues about Theodore's past. Secrets that, if revealed, could change the course of history for all of them. The winds of change began to blow stronger in the Andrade mansion, as if the house, after years of silence and pain, was preparing to reveal its own secrets. For Carol, Theodore's last words still echoed in her mind, but at the same time, she knew the time had come to face the future. Her heart, though still tight with loss, was beginning to open to the new possibilities that lay ahead. The invitation given to Katerina to manage the grandmother's bakery was beginning to bear fruit. The kitchen, which had once been a place of bitter memories, was now becoming fertile ground for her own renewal. With every cake she made, every dish that was completed, a part of her essence came back to life. But the most important thing was that she wasn't alone. Nicholas, with his characteristic shyness, was beginning to get involved in the kitchen, helping his mother prepare the ingredients and even daring with some recipes. Meanwhile, Dmitri isolated himself more and more. His dilemma between continuing in business or following his true desire to be a writer consumed him. He had started writing, but his words still seemed empty, as if something essential was missing. He knew he needed an internal change, something that would help him bring his stories to life. It was at this moment of frustration that Louise's figure became more enigmatic. In his conversations with Dmitri, he always seemed to know exactly what to say, as if he were just waiting for him to reach the right conclusion. But what did Louise really want with all of this? What did he know about the Andrade family's past that no one else knew? That afternoon, while Carol was in the kitchen with Katerina and Nicholas, a loud noise came from the living room. The snap of a piece of furniture followed by a muffled scream. It was Rosa who had found something, an old dusty book hidden inside a locked drawer in Theodore's office. "Carol, you need to see this!" shouted Rosa, her expression tense and worried. Carol ran to where Rosa was, her heart racing. When she saw the book, she immediately knew something was wrong. It was a journal. Not the kind of journal someone keeps about their everyday life, but a journal filled with rushed, handwritten notes that seemed more like a file of secrets than anything else. I didn't know he kept this here," Carol said, her voice trembling. Rosa flipped through the pages, and gradually the pieces began to fall into place. Theodore never spoke about this, but it looks like he knew more about the family's past than we imagined. The book spoke of a time long before Carol met Theodore, of secret meetings, and an old debt that the Andrade family seemed to have left behind. Louise's name appeared multiple times in the yellowed pages. "Louise, did you know about this?" Carol asked, looking at him. He stood in the doorway, watching the scene silently. Louise remained silent for a long moment before stepping closer. "It's time you know the truth, Carol." He sat in the nearest chair and began to tell a story that no one there was expecting to hear. In his youth, Louise had been more than just a friend of the Andrade family. He had been directly involved in an old scandal that, if revealed, could change everyone's future. The financial debts of Theodore, which seemed to be resolved, had roots much deeper than they realized, and Louise, at some point, had been a crucial part of it all. Carol was in shock. Every word seemed to come from a dark and unknown place. "You can't be serious, right? This could destroy everything we've built, Louise. How could you have kept this hidden for so long?" Louise sighed. "I didn't choose to keep these secrets, Carol, but I had to make difficult choices. The things Theodore did, his mistakes, weren't just his, they were all of ours." As Carol recovered from the shock, another truth began to unfold in her mind. Everything she thought she knew about her own history was being challenged. Theodore, the man she had loved so much, was far from being the perfect figure she had always imagined, and the book, with its yellowed pages, was just beginning to reveal how complex and unsettling the true story of the Andrade family really was. The atmosphere in the Andrade mansion was thick with palpable tension. Louise's words about Theodore's hidden past still echoed in Carol's mind. Every new piece of information about her husband, the man she thought she knew so well, seemed to dismantle the certainties she had built over the course of her life. She couldn't deny the pain of betrayal, but she also couldn't ignore the need to move forward. After all, what was left to do? Life didn't stop. And as she struggled to regain her composure, the other family members began to find their own paths to transformation. Katerina, after months of internal struggle, finally began to feel at peace with herself. The kitchen of Confiteria d'Avovaux, once a place of frustration and despair, now became the setting of a new phase. Her cakes and sweets, made with such care, reflected her renewal. She rediscovered herself there, in each recipe, in each gesture. The taste of her sweets was not just an explosion of flavor, but a metaphor for her journey of self-discovery. Nicholas, still in his maturation process, began to emerge from his shell. Music, which had once seemed like just an escape for him, now gained a much deeper meaning. As he dedicated himself more to the piano, he realized that his art was a way to express his pain, his insecurities, and finally, his victories. His heart pulsed with a new energy, and he knew that this talent was something to be shared with the world. Dmitri, for his part, felt increasingly distant from the business world. The meetings and numbers that once fascinated him now seemed empty and purposeless. He began writing more intensely, diving into his own experiences and the feelings that Theodore's death had awakened in him. He finally discovered the true essence of his passion: telling stories. The pages of his notebook, once filled with soulless drafts, now overflowed with emotions and reflections. As the family took big steps toward self-awareness, Carol tried to balance the revelations about Theodore with the new role she was assuming. She could no longer retreat into the pain of the past. Now, more than ever, she knew her mission was to strengthen the family bonds and help them find their own paths. Luis, however, remained an enigmatic figure. He had always been there, by the family's side, but the truth about his past was only just beginning to be uncovered. The secret he kept about Theodore still loomed like a shadow over everyone. Although he had started getting closer to Carol, his true intentions remained unclear. It was then that Rosa, with her investigative and determined eye, uncovered another piece of the puzzle. During a visit to an old library in the city, she found records that connected Louise to a crucial period in Theodore's life. Something related to the old debt the Andrade family had never known about. Now, more than ever, Carol knew there was much more at stake than just financial misunderstandings. "I need to understand all of this, Rosa," Carol said, her voice firm, though the weight of her distress still lingered. "I need to know how all of this affects my family. What did Theodore hide from us?" Rosa, without hesitation, placed her hand on Carol's shoulder. "The truth is closer than you think, and if necessary, we will uncover it." And so, as the Andrade house began to rebuild, new truths came to light. Carol and her family's path was now clear, but the challenges ahead were great. The reconnection with the past would be painful but necessary. And along this journey, everyone would have to learn to face the truth about what had happened, who they really were, and what the future still held in store for them. The mansion was quiet that morning, a strange silence hanging over the hallways that, until recently, had been full of laughter and conversation. Carol felt a growing pressure in her chest. The revelations about Theodore's past, and especially about Louise, had shaken her emotional foundation. But at the same time, she knew she had to confront the truth. There was no more running away. As she had her coffee on the porch, the view of the still untouched garden made her feel a pang of nostalgia. There, so many times with Theodore, she had felt at home. Now all that remained was a sense of emptiness and confusion. But in this emptiness, she began to notice something. Her family was starting to rebuild itself, slowly, but with strength. The pain was still there, but life, with all its complexities, could not be ignored. Katerina, for example, was spending more and more time at the bakery. The business, once just a means of subsistence, had now become a place of therapy for her. She threw herself into the cakes with a renewed passion, and when she saw the satisfaction on the customers' faces, something sparked inside her. That place, with its sweet and welcoming aroma, was her new anchor. She was starting to see a future for herself that no longer passed through the shadows of her lost past. Every recipe was a story, each customer a new opportunity for a fresh start. Meanwhile, Nicholas, who had once seemed lost in a sea of insecurities, now threw himself into music with an unexpected intensity. His performance at the Christmas recital seemed closer than ever. He felt nervous, of course, but he knew that his music was what defined him, what made him feel complete. And with Isabella's support, he finally felt that he was finding his place in the world. Dmitri, in turn, was diving deeper and deeper into writing. His stories were taking shape, and he was surprised by the depth of his own emotions. He had a rare ability to capture the essence of everyday life and transform it into something beautiful. Writing was becoming more than just a passion. It was a necessity. He no longer wanted to lose himself in numbers, endless meetings, and the insatiable search for material success. Literature was now his true mission. But despite the accomplishments and progress of his children, Carol felt that something was behind this false sense of peace. The secret that Louise carried, the debt he shared with Theodore, did not sit well with her. What did he really know about her husband's past? How did he fit into all of this? And more importantly, what did this mean for the future of her family? It was Rosa who, once again, brought the answer. She appeared in the living room with a serious expression and her hands firmly holding an old envelope. "Carol," she began in a grave voice, "I found something." With a gesture that seemed to weigh an eternity, Rosa handed the envelope to Carol. Inside, there was a letter yellowed with age, but perfectly legible. It was a letter from Theodore, dated years earlier, addressed to Louise. The content of the letter, however, was more than just words. It was a promise of a secret that involved not only the Andrade family, but also a series of financial decisions that had been made in secrecy. That letter contained the last thread of a web of lies and deceptions that were now beginning to surface. "I didn't know about this," said Carol, her voice trembling. She was shaken, but the determination to understand what was going on kept her steady. Louis, however, wasn't willing to reveal everything. When confronted, he remained silent, his eyes avoiding Carol's. The situation was more tense than she imagined, but one thing became clear. The truth about Theodore's past wasn't fully resolved. Meanwhile, the rest of the family didn't know about the secret that was now out in the open. Carol decided she needed to understand everything on her own first, before deciding how to tell them. After all, they had already faced so much hardship, and she didn't want this new burden to destroy them. The feeling that something was about to change in the Andrade family's destiny seemed inevitable. What would Carol do with the truth she now possessed? Confront Louise, reveal the secret to the children, or try somehow to forgive the mistakes of the past and move forward? The answer was still unclear, but with every step she began to understand that the past couldn't be ignored, and that in order for her family to truly heal, everyone would need to face their own truths. The morning was grey, and the wind that blew through the trees of the Andrade mansion seemed to bring with it an omen. Carol, now holding Theodore's letter in her hands, and with Louise's secret still fresh in her mind, felt the weight of everything that was to come. She knew she couldn't carry this burden any longer. Her children, Katerina, Dmitri, and even Nicholas, were moving forward in their own journeys. But the revelation of Theodore's past required a decision. What would she do with this? How could she rebuild the family after those painful truths? Katerina, as always, seemed to be the strongest amidst it all. She was in the bakery, lost in the rhythm of recipes, when Carol sought her out. The smile Katerina gave her when she entered the kitchen was contagious, but Carol noticed that her sister felt the tension in the air. Something was about to change, and Katerina's look said that she already knew that. "Carol," said Katerina, stopping what she was doing, "what's going on? What haven't you told me yet?" Carol hesitated. She looked at her sister and then, without saying a word, handed her the letter. Katerina, confused, carefully took the paper, but soon her expression turned more serious as she read the words on it. She finished reading and, for a moment, remained silent. "I knew something was wrong," Katerina said, her voice soft, but full of a weight that Carol hadn't expected. "But I never imagined it was something like this. What are we going to do with it?" Carol took a deep breath. "I don't know yet. I can't just forget." The conversation was interrupted by a phone call from Dmitri. He wanted to gather everyone at the mansion for a meeting, something urgent. Carol knew this would be the moment to share the secret with her children. There was no more hiding. The meeting was tense. All the family members were gathered in the mansion's main room, and the heavy air of uncertainty hung over them. Dmitri, as always, took the lead in the conversation. "Carol, what's going on?" he asked, concern written on his face. Carol sat in front of them, Theodore's letter now visible in her hands, and began to speak. "I found something about Theodore's past, and I can't hide it anymore. Louise, he has a secret, something involving a debt, a promise from Theodore to him. I don't know all the details yet, but this changes everything." The tension in the room increased. Dmitri looked at his mother, suspicious, but also with a certain apprehension. Nicholas, who had been quiet until then, lifted his eyes from his piano and fixed them on his mother. "So, is that it?" he said, his voice firmer than usual. "Everything we've built here was based on lies?" "No," Carol responded, her voice trembling but determined. "What's happening now is painful, but it can't erase what we've lived. The family, the love we have, that doesn't change." Rosa, who was in the room, now felt the pressure of revealing her own secret. She, who had returned to the mansion after years, also had a story to tell. Her search for the truth about the family had led her to discover something more. She already knew that Carol's revelation wasn't the only one. What she was about to say would once again change the course of the story. "I also found something," Rosa said, with a seriousness that made everyone turn to her. "Something Theodore left for me, something that has to do with our past. He wasn't just the man everyone knew. He had secrets, and this will affect all of us." Carol felt a chill down her spine. The room was now filled with revelations, each one darker than the last. But the biggest question still lingered. Would it be possible to rebuild trust after so many lies? Meanwhile, Katerina's relationship with her son Nicholas was becoming stronger. She increasingly saw herself as a refuge for him, especially on the nights when he locked himself in his room, trying to understand what music meant amidst all the confusion. She encouraged him to keep going, to pursue his dream, and in return, she found the strength to continue her own journey. "You're stronger than you think," Katerina said one night while Nicholas practiced at his piano. "The music is yours, and no one can take it from you." That phrase echoed in Nicholas's mind. He knew that despite the uncertainties around him, music would be his safe haven. It would help him get through the toughest moments. Dmitri, on the other hand, was diving deeper and deeper into writing, still searching for answers to the questions that plagued him. But despite his relentless search for meaning, he knew that nothing would ever be the same. This new direction for the family, as painful as it was beginning to make him more aware of his own flaws and how he would need to reinvent himself in order to find true happiness. At the end of the chapter, the family stood on the brink of an irreversible transformation. The lies, secrets, and unspoken truths were about to be exposed, but this could be the key to rebuilding something stronger, something truer. The Andrade mansion had never seemed so silent. The walls, once filled with laughter and conversations, now felt laden with tension, as if the air itself had become denser. Carol was sitting alone in the grand room, Theodore's letter resting on the table before her, an undeniable testament to a past that she now needed to fully understand. Everything she had known, her life with Theodore, was unraveling one piece at a time. However, while the weight of the truth crushed her, a decision was being made, without words, inside her. No matter what had happened, she wouldn't let the past steal her future. She needed her family to move forward, and for that, she would have to confront each of her children with everything she had discovered, even if it was painful. It was Dmitri who appeared first. He entered the room without saying a word, his eyes filled with a kind of anguish Carol had never seen before. He didn't ask, didn't demand explanations, but his eyes said it all. The silence that followed was uncomfortable, until he finally broke it. "Mom, what do you intend to do with all of this?" Dmitri's voice was firm, but there was a hint of disguised desperation. He was trying to maintain control, but the pressure from the recently revealed secrets was beginning to wear away at his facade. "I don't know yet, Dmitri. I just know that the truth needs to be told, no matter how painful it is," Carol replied, looking at her son, unsure of what else to say. The words seemed too small in the face of the magnitude of the situation. The door to the room opened again, this time with Katerina entering hastily. She seemed more determined than ever, but Carol knew that her sister was just as lost as she was. The surprise of the revelation still hung over her, and though it was clear that Katerina was starting to rise again, there was a fragility in her gaze. "Carol, do you really think we need more secrets now?" Katerina asked, her voice blending anger with the pain of years of mourning and uncertainty. "Everything that has happened is already enough. We can't move forward with more lies. There is no escaping the truth," Carol replied firmly. "The truth may hurt us, but it's the only way to rebuild." At that moment, the door opened again, and Rosa, with a tense expression, entered the room. She had a folder in hand, clearly prepared to speak, but Carol knew this wouldn't be easy. The investigative journalist had uncovered more about Theodore's past, and she wasn't there just to share news, but to expose something that could change the game. Rosa sat down slowly. Her normally assured eyes were restless. "I found more, Carol. Something that changes the course of everything." Carol looked at Rosa, apprehension taking hold of her. "What did you find, Rosa?" Rosa took a deep breath and began to speak, each word carrying the weight of a bomb about to explode. "Theodore had an unpaid debt, a debt with Louise, something related to a mistake from the past that he hid from all of us. The situation was serious, Carol, much more than we imagined. The room seemed to freeze, everyone's eyes fixed on Rosa. No words were spoken for a few seconds. Carol felt her body heat up, sweat beginning to bead on her forehead. How had she never known this? How could Theodore have hidden something so big, something that, if it had come to light, would have changed the entire trajectory of the family? "Louise was always around, but I never knew how involved he was in all of this," Rosa said, with a distant look. "I found documents, conversations. Louise was more involved than we thought." The tension was at its peak. Carol looked at her children, who were as affected as she was. Dmitri seemed lost, his pale face reflecting the anguish of someone trying to understand how all of this fit into the narrative of his life. Katerina, with trembling hands, was trying to process the information, but Carol knew her sister was more concerned about the future of the bakery and the impact all of this would have on the plans she had started to build. Nikolai, who had remained silent until that moment, observed everything from a distance. His gaze, however, was the calmest, almost as if he already knew that, no matter how painful, nothing that was happening would change his mission: music. But even he knew that the twists and turns that were unfolding weren't simple, and that everyone was about to change. "I don't know what to do with all of this," Carol said, finally breaking the silence. "But I know that somehow we need to find a way to move forward. with or without the secrets, with or without the mistakes of the past. Dmitri stood up, his gaze firm, now full of a new determination. Then let's do what we need to do, Mom. Let's face this head on, no matter how painful it is. I can't promise it will be easy, Carol replied, feeling the weight of what was about to happen. But I know that if we stay together, maybe we can heal the wounds. At that moment, the house seemed to breathe. Carol knew that the journey of rebuilding had just begun and that many more revelations would come to light. But one thing was clear. It was time to face the truth, and nothing would ever be the same. It was night in the Andrade mansion, and the atmosphere was heavy. The revelation that Theodore had hidden an unpaid debt with Louise, a secret kept for years, hung over everyone like an insurmountable shadow. But deep down, Carol knew she couldn't continue her life while still living in the past. It was time to face the consequences, no matter how bitter they were. In the main room, the family was gathered once again, but this time with a different purpose. Each one was silent, absorbed in their own thoughts. The atmosphere, which had once been a place of reunions and joy, now felt like a prison. However, a change was about to take place, even though the words were still difficult to say. Carol stood up, holding Theodore's letter. She no longer knew what to expect, but she felt that she had to take a step forward, even though it was uncomfortable. I found something we need to discuss, something we can no longer ignore, she began, her voice firm, but filled with an unmistakable tremor. Her children's eyes met, and she realized that Dmitri was more tense than ever. Katerina, on the other hand, seemed to absorb everything with a critical eye, trying to find some angle where the pain of the past could be reconciled with the present. I know we're all shaken, Carol continued, but we can't move forward without addressing what's in our way, not just for us, but for everything that Theodore and our family represented. It was then that Dmitri, up until that point holding on to his controlled expression, stood up abruptly. No, we can't just accept this. Theodore's debt to Louise, the lies. This can't be his legacy. He was the man who built this family, who gave us everything we needed, and now all that's left are secrets. The tension increased, and Dmitri's pain in his words was palpable. The wound was open, and no one knew exactly how to treat it. But Carol knew that the first step was for each one to take responsibility, acknowledge their mistakes, and start rebuilding, even if it was hard. I don't know what my role is in all of this, Katerina said, her voice slightly trembling. I'm lost, Carol. This debt, these secrets. How can I believe we can overcome all of this, especially with the bakery, the business Theodore loved, in the hands of a past he never told us about? Carol looked at her sister, feeling a mix of empathy and hope. She knew Katerina had lost herself over the years, but she also knew that she had the strength to rise again. The bakery was an important part of the family's history, and Carol believed it could be the key to a new phase. Katerina, you have what it takes to rebuild our history. The bakery is not just a business, it's a memory, a legacy that Theodore valued. And that's why you need to continue. I can't do this alone, and you don't need to carry this burden alone either. The silence that followed was heavy, but Carol's words seemed to resonate through the room, touching everyone's hearts. Dmitri, although still shaken, looked at his mother with a different gaze. Something inside him was beginning to stir, an idea that might still be impossible to understand, but was becoming clearer with each passing moment. I need to write about this, Dmitri finally said, his voice softer. I need to tell the story of our family, of how we were defeated and how together we can rebuild. I will write about each one of us, and this will be our new truth, not the lie Theodore hid, but the truth of who we are now, of what we can be. Yes, Dmitri, Carol replied, a shy smile beginning to form on her face. That is our truth, and no matter how difficult it is, we will find it together. As Carol's words echoed through the room, Rosa, who had been silent until then, stood up. She held the folder with the documents she had found about Louise and Theodore, the mystery that was beginning to unfold before them. "I know this isn't resolved yet," she said, her voice firm. "But I believe that if we are careful, we can understand what happened and, with that, rebuild what was lost." For everyone there, Rosa's words brought a new kind of hope. The revelation of such a huge secret didn't have to be the end of everything. On the contrary, it could be the bridge to something new. It was time to look ahead, to mend the broken ties, and to rebuild, step by step, what seemed lost. As the night went on, a sense of renewal filled the house. The weight of the revelations was still present, but there was also something else, a growing desire to move forward. It was as if the sound of Nicholas's piano, playing from upstairs, was the perfect reflection of this new beginning, the silent transformation happening within each of them. In Carol's heart, a certainty was forming. No matter how difficult the road, the Andrade family still had much to offer the world. And more importantly, there was still room for new beginnings. The cutting chill of the December night was present, but inside the Andrade mansion, the warmth of change seemed to envelop everyone. The preparations for the Christmas recital were at their peak, and once again, the family was united, but this time for a happier reason. Nicholas, Carol's shy and insecure son, would be performing for the first time before an audience. The event wasn't just a performance, it was a symbol of all the new beginnings the family had embraced. The room was filled with flowers and simple yet elegant arrangements, as if, in that moment, the mansion was preparing to finally bloom after so many years of pain. Isabella's soft voice guided Nicholas, her tutor and friend, as he warmed up for the big night. In the kitchen, Katerina was leaning over the counter, focused on preparing a special dish for the celebration. She had distanced herself from her passion for cooking for so long, but now, with Carol's support and a new outlook on her purpose, it seemed like she had found herself again. Each gesture in the kitchen was precise and filled with love, as if it were a gift, not only for the family but for herself as well. "Are you calm?" Carol asked, watching her sister. "Calm. I think I'm more excited than nervous," Katerina replied, a genuine smile on her face. "I never imagined I'd feel this way again. The kitchen, the bakery, it makes me feel alive again." Carol smiled encouragingly, recognizing that even in the face of obstacles, her sister was reclaiming the essence she had lost over the years. "You're amazing, Katerina. Theodore would be proud to see how you're taking your place back." Outside the mansion, Louise and Renato stood on the porch, observing the activity inside. Louise, who until then had been an enigmatic figure, now seemed closer to the family. His mysterious and incomplete past with Theodore was beginning to intertwine with their present in an unexpected way. Renato, in turn, appeared more open, his bitter look softened by the new relationships being forged in the house. "Do you feel like it's the right time to reveal everything, Luis?" Renato asked, his eyes fixed on the horizon. Luis looked at him with a heavy sigh. Maybe the right time is when everyone is ready to listen. But no matter what happens, I know that their story, the story of the family, needs to be told, and one way or another, it will come out. Meanwhile, inside the mansion, the first guests had begun to arrive. The anxiety in the air was palpable, but this time there was something different. It wasn't just preparation for a recital, it was preparation for a new chapter where the family gathered to celebrate not death, but life. The recital began. Nicholas, visibly nervous, was on stage. The audience was quiet, waiting. His eyes searched for Carol's familiar figure in the crowd, and when he saw her smile at him, something within him lit up. He knew he was there for something much greater than just a simple recital. He was there to prove to himself and to his family that he could indeed shine. The music began softly, almost hesitantly. But as Nicholas played, his touch became firmer, more confident. The room grew quiet, and the sounds of the piano began to take shape, like a song of redemption for himself and for everyone around him. The recital, which initially seemed like just a charity event, transformed into a moment of deep reflection, a milestone in the Andrade family's life. Isabella beside him, accompanied with mastery. Together, they formed a perfect harmony, and for the first time in a long while, the music in the Andrade mansion no longer felt like an echo of the past, but a symbol of a future full of possibilities. As the music resonated through the room, Carol felt a mix of pride and gratitude. She looked at her children and the gathered family, and for the first time in a long time, she didn't see the pain of mourning, but a vibrant renewal. Their journey was still far from over, but there, at that recital, she felt that something profound had been healed. The night continued with celebrations, laughter, and a sense of renewed hope. The house, which had been a place of silence and loss for so long, was now filled with life, as if it had finally found its true purpose, to be a home, a place of new beginnings, where family bonds were stronger than ever. And so, the story of the Andrade family continued, not as a story of an end, but as a story of new beginnings, growth and healing. Theodore's legacy once again showed itself not in what he left behind, but in what he inspired to create. The past could be painful, but the future now was promising. And now, everyone, what did you think of the Christmas recital and this great transformation in the Andrade family? Nicholas's story, which went from a shy boy to a true musical prodigy, is undoubtedly a reflection of how overcoming challenges can change our lives, isn't it? And Katerina, who found a new purpose in the bakery, showed us that it's never too late to restart and rediscover our passion. The mansion, once filled with the silence of longing, now breathes life and new possibilities, just like the family itself. If you like this story of overcoming, transformation, and new beginnings, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next chapters. Turn on the bell to receive notifications whenever there's a new video, because this journey of the Andrade family is just getting started. Now, I want to know your opinion. Which character do you think had the greatest transformation throughout the chapters? And how do you think Theodore's past secret will impact Carol and her family's life? Leave your comment below. I really want to know what you think and what you imagine will happen. Let's continue this conversation in the comments. See you in the next video.